So welcome everybody to this is our first PRISM meeting. It's doing amazing, to be honest. We've got lots and lots of people signed up, which we'll let you know a little bit later on. But just to start with, there's myself. I'm Katie from ABP, and there is Megan from ABP as well to help me along with all the questions. We've also got Michael Haverty from the Andersons Group and Jude Capper from Harper Adams on the call, and then Mike Powley and Crosby Crelland, our farmers, to hopefully give you a flavour of how they've found PRISM so far. So just for a little bit of housekeeping, hopefully you've all used Teams before, but I'm just going to share my screen for a couple of slides. So if you haven't used Teams before, then there is the chat function. If you've got any questions that you need to ask, please type them in the chat box throughout this evening, and then we'll hopefully be asking questions either before or at 7:30 if we're still chatting to Mike and Crosby at that point. I know there is the raise hand function, but please don't use it tonight because we've got over 100 people signed up, and so with lots of people, that one will be difficult. And actually, what I haven't done already, but it seems okay, is I will probably mute everybody so that we don't get any background noise. But as I'm now sharing my screen, I'll leave it to, for the minute. So just before I tell you any more, actually, I will just mute everybody so we don't get any background noise. I want to ask a poll. So to find out how many of you are already in PRISM and how many of you are here to learn a bit more about it. So if you can just all answer that poll to start with, please. So that's great. So we've got 38% of you, or nearly 50, oh, it's just still changing. So 50% of people aren't currently joined up and actually obviously are here to learn more, and hopefully we'll maybe persuade you to join up by the end of this meeting. So just share my screen again. So to give you a little bit more about PRISM, what is PRISM and what does it mean? So PRISM is our program for improving the sustainability of red meat. Obviously, carbon benchmarking allows us to understand what farm greenhouse gas emissions are within your system and your enterprises. It's comparable across years and between businesses which use the same calculations. And the interest is growing significantly, especially with our government focus on the environment. And it's a key priority for ABP because sustainability is key for everyone. We're always looking at innovative ways to try and make a difference. And with 90% of the emissions for beef and lamb being at a farm level, there's a huge potential impact if we can try and reduce those emissions even just by a small amount. And, you know, people talk about that beef and lamb in the UK is the most sustainable in the world, but actually we need those figures to prove it. And we all want to have greener businesses and be better. So PRISM 2030, this programme will go on for 2 to 3 years in duration, and we're looking for 350 beef and lamb farmers. We'll be having events, discussion groups, other tailored events, depends what the farmers involved will require, and then we will share those benefits wider. And within PRISM, so Michael from the Andersons Centre, Andersons are the guys going out doing the carbon footprinting. They really understand the carbon footprinting inside and out. So do ask those assessors when they're out or when they're doing the feedback sessions if you have any questions. And obviously Michael's here tonight to answer questions too. And then Jude Capper, I don't think there's anything about sustainability that Jude doesn't know. So again, ask away questions to Jude this evening, and Jude's doing a report back for every farm as well on where you can make the most gains on your farm. So our goal, we obviously want to lower the emissions, but also produce less waste, better use of resources on farm, and to help increase the margins for farmers. And sustainability and reducing your carbon footprint really does go hand in hand with productivity a lot of the time. So what is sustainability, or what does sustainability mean to you? So this could be quite an interesting one now. I'm going to do a little poll, and I want you to write in 1 or 2 words what sustainability means to you. And then it will create us a magic picture of sustainability and what it means. Right, well, I think I'll leave that open and you can carry on popping things in there while I just give you a flavour of where we are within PRISM at the moment. Our progress within the PRISM programme, we now have 310 active contacts for PRISM. So we're looking for 350. So there's only 40 spaces left now. And we've had 120 that have already gone through the AgriCalc assessment, which represents roughly 15% of the cattle supply through to ABP and 14% of the lamb supply. You can see on the right in those graphs that that's the rough distribution of whether they are lamb only or beef and lamb producers or beef only and beef and lamb producers, and the size of the enterprise of what they're supplying us. So we've tried to get a good distribution across obviously small, medium and larger businesses so that we can have it all analysed, and obviously we can see how the different businesses fare through what they're doing on their farms, and obviously every farm is different. And therefore, obviously, every target and what areas you want to target will be different too. So I think we'll start the chat with Mike and Crosby, because that's who you're here to listen to, not to listen to me. So welcome, Mike and Crosby, to this evening. Who would like to give us a brief overview of your farm first? Crosby, do you want to start and give us just a brief overview of your farming system, please?
Yes, certainly. Farmer in Sinfield, about 10 miles south of Belfast, Northern Ireland. In the 80s, 90s, with farming sucklers and sheep. Got rid of the sucklers, reared calves. When I got to the year 2000, I reduced the bank overdraft and went sheep only. So from 2000, we've been running 800 ewes, roughly 800 to 900 ewes, keeping about 200 ewe lambs each year through hogget stage, and finishing them into ABP.
Thank you very much.
I would add to that, actually, I suppose we're covering, it's quite intensive. We're doing that over 70 hectares. So, and then we've got herbal lays. We've been doing herbal lays for the last 4 years. So with that high stocking rate, there is a low fertilizer usage at the beginning of the year just to get the grass started.
Okay, thank you. And Mike, can you give us a brief overview of your system, please?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Powley. I farm at Greenhammerton, which is between York and Harrogate, edge of the Vale of York, 30 metres above sea level, 650 mil of rain. I have 100 suckler cows, moving up to 120. We've just built a new farmstead. Spring calving, very traditional, high EBV, all AI, 9-week calving, all finished on farm, all feed produced on farm, mainly going to ABP, some into a box scheme. That's about half the 300 acres, and the other half is in regen agriculture. So that's complete no-till and following Gabe Brown's 5 principles, and the two parts of the business run really well together. So we produce all our own feed now, also sell wheat, barley and beans off the farm, as well as the beef.
Great, thank you, Mike. And why did you both get involved in PRISM? What made you interested to get involved in PRISM?
Well, personally, I think it's very important that farmers work together, and you're getting farmers of the same thinking and trying to get figures that we can go out to the public and try to represent, influence the general public to realise that agriculture is a good modern, get the modern influence into it and get support from the industry for our industry.
From my point of view, carbon footprinting and low carbon is efficient production. So I need to look very hard at our carbon footprint, especially it highlights the synergies between the two enterprises on the farm. And as Crosby said, we need the information, we need the stats so that we can challenge the negative publicity that we keep seeing in the farming press. and we need to defend on what we're doing. If you simply look at carbon footprint, yeah, some enterprises aren't very brilliant, but if you actually look at the carbon footprint and put into the equation the nutrient density of what we're producing, then it's a very different story.
And some people have said to me, it's going to take, will it take me a lot of time, and is that time just going to be wasted to produce some figures? How have you found, how long did it take you to go through the assessment, and have you obviously found it useful?
Well, I mean, Michael came round to me and we started into the figures, but I was fortunate enough I've already completed an agriculture through AgResearch, and I did know the ins and outs of it. The first time round, it's quite a lot of work getting the figures together, but the benchmarking figures that we'll be doing annually are very, very useful, and really coming from our own benchmarking figures. And a few bits to add, just small example, Michael, would be how many units of electricity, how many litres of fuel, and then you had to say how much well, I was fortunate, I've only sheep and have another fencing thing going, so I was able to split between two. A little bit of work on that, but what I would say when it came to do the second one, it was much easier, and I would say from here on, I know what I need.
I won't pretend it's easy, but all of the figures that are required to put into the to give to Anderson's to put into the equations are all figures that we should really have to hand. You know, if we're efficient and on the ball, I would suggest everything that they ask for, you should know already. And if you don't, this is a really good prod with a sharp, pointy stick to make you do it. So I would encourage people to go ahead with it. It might be a bit painful and time consuming at the start, but it will actually, as Crosby said, it will start to make you realise where your costs are within your business. And the other thing that Crosby said before was, once we've got the figures, if people are prepared to be open with them, it then starts a discussion. And I don't know about the rest of you guys, but at times I struggle to find really go-ahead farmers to throw ideas around with. So this group and this forum, hopefully, you know, will enable me to learn from you guys, and hopefully I can pass a few points on to you as well. So it is well worth doing. It's time invested. You'll learn about your business, and that's really just a starting. As far as I'm concerned, the value then comes back to you in terms of what you can learn from the group. So yeah, well worth doing.
I'll back up Mike on that again, because when we got together and started comparing figures, it was, it helped because it's something to balance what you were doing yourself. Some were high, some were low, but it gave us a better better look into what we're doing.
It was really interesting, actually, you guys bouncing ideas, and actually it's not just you comparing similar suckler herds, because actually you guys were, when you were bouncing your figures around, obviously you're completely separate business, one suckler, one sheep, and actually comparing your figures and talking through them was really, really useful, wasn't it, for both of you? How have you found the reports that you've had sent back to you in your feedback sessions?
Well, I found it very useful. Well, naturally, it's a bit like the benchmarking, but you have to sit down and what are you good at, what are you not so good at? I mean, the report pulled mostly out that the meal that I was using was one of my biggest faults, or not fault. It's all to do with weather till at home, but it's something I can look at and develop with. The numbers game, as in there seems to be chat in Ireland here that we're supposed to cut our stock by half, but yet the results that we're pulling back at the end, I think I was getting 27 kilos of CO2 per dead weight of lamb that I produced. Well, that's well below the average of what some others were doing, and it's well worth it.
It's definitely well worth it. It's not necessarily about being the lowest figures. If when the report comes back, we had 1 or 2 high figures, and it then makes you start to think about why they're high. And if you can justify why they're high, that's fine. It's not about being the lowest figures right across the board, but it just starts you thinking about your business. The report, it's very comprehensive, and it's good to get feedback from Jude on the report as well, to give some ideas as to you know, the ways forward and what we can do. So that then gives me some more targets to aim at and drive at, some of which I was aware of, quite a few I wasn't aware of. So it's all positive. Once you get the report, that's then the start of the change, if you like.
So you have had some not necessarily big surprises, but I was going to say, were the reports as you thought they would be, or your areas of target where you thought it would be? Or sounds like you have had some areas that you didn't expect where you needed to make changes.
Yeah, I could have predicted what was going to be said in some of it, but that outside opinion, another person looking at my figures and going over them, it made me think, and it helped me a lot through the whole. It's quite a lot to look through, and it takes time, but it's well worth every bit of it. Yep.
Yeah, definitely, and also again having sort of Jude there and Katie to talk to as well, and throw ideas around and ask questions about, you know, but having that benchmark as to where you are compared to the rest of the group. I say it's not about being the lowest, but it gives you an idea where you are, because I don't know about the rest of you, but it's very, very difficult to benchmark yourself these days, and this is a very in-depth tool that will help us work on this. So yeah, it's just the start of the journey, really, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, you mentioned there, Mike. I did say that mine was below average, but I wasn't really emphasising it was for that. I think what was in the back of my head was my stocking rate is quite high, and I was expecting myself to be out of the range. So that was the plus that came back from it. So there's a lot of thought to go into this, and a lot more bargaining to happen yet within the whole setup. I'm talking about the amount of, I mean, over half of my 630 tonnes is methane, and that's supposed to dissipate within 12 years, but yet the full value has been taken against the nitrous oxide and the carbon dioxide. It doesn't seem right to me at the minute, but it's certainly one that Michael Haverty's been trying to explain to me.
Have you any comments on that, Jude, in terms of how the calculations might change a little bit over time?
A very good question, as ever. Yeah, so what we're referring to here is a new metric called Global Warming Potential Star. It's come out of Oxford University, which for the ag industry is actually a really positive thing. And the reason I say that is it's come out from climate scientists. So it's independent, it's impartial. This isn't, you know, us in ag going, aha, let's find this new metric which will make us look better. You know, this is entirely impartial. And honestly, it is the most accurate way to measure the ways that different greenhouse gases build up in the atmosphere, or in this case break down. So previously, under Global Warming Potential 100, which is what AgriCalc uses, which is what's in your reports, and which hopefully will change, or will use both metrics at some point in future. Under that metric, we thought that all the greenhouse gases just built up over time and just kept going and going and going. And now what we know is that methane breaks down over about 20 years. So Global Warming Potential Star takes that into account, which can bring down our carbon footprint. Now, there are a number of caveats. This isn't an automatic, you know, get out of jail free card, because it depends on your predicting your methane emissions from 20 years ago. So if your farm wasn't a farm, or was 10 smaller farms, or had half the number of cows, you know, 20 years ago, you're not necessarily going to have a lower carbon footprint now. And there are, you know, some farms, of course, that can say exactly what they were doing 20 years ago, but there's an awful lot that were part of a bigger estate, or lots and lots of different farms where we can't make those predictions. So it's really good at predicting what we did, what we're doing at a national level, because we can easily say, you know, 20 years ago we had X number of breeding cows in the UK, and now we have Y number of breeding cows, but we've still got some difficulties implementing it at the farm level. But it is supposed to be coming. AgriCalc, I believe, are going to be putting it into their software, and we'll probably see a situation in the future, and this is a probably, where we'll be looking at carbon footprints in terms of both metrics. So the traditional one, the GWP 100, which is the one that's used at the moment, and it'll probably also show the GWP star as well, and that should, emphasis on should, bring down most of our carbon footprints, because it'll take into account the fact that methane breaks down. I apologise if that's a bit technical. I could talk on this for many hours with a PowerPoint. So
Thanks, Jude. If I may jump in on that as well, just to mention in terms of AgriCalc, there is a forthcoming version, and it is indeed planned to have both GWP 100 and the GWP star metric that Jude has explained. And for those who've done the assessments in the past, like, this new version is going to integrate well and as part of the upgrade. You shouldn't see any significant differences there, as I understand it. One point I would make, you know, whichever metric is used, you can and should, I think, be focusing on how to improve against that. Even if GWP 100, for all its imperfections at the moment, it can still identify areas where you can improve your emissions performance. And if you can hit that sweet spot in terms of improving both emissions and improving productivity, I think that's a really good starting point.
Maybe Kitty, when we've got the subject brought up, could I ask maybe both Jude and Michael again? It's just that the Beacon Farm project, there are 34 farms involved, both beef and lamb involved with it, but they have brought soil sequestration into it, and what they're trying to say is they've taken samples at the top level and 30 centimeters down, I think, but they're coming back and saying that soil sequestration can cut in the sheep farm up to 47% of the figure out of it, and in the beef 43%. So I'm sure that's a good, well, that's a question for you.
Go for it, Michael.
I think in terms of soil carbon sequestration, yes, you make a very good point, Crosby. You know, it is an area that needs to be focused on. I think where we are at it on the moment is, I think some of the science behind it does need a bit more focus. It does need to become more robust. There's certainly things that can be done on that front. Some of what we've seen has been a bit on the optimistic side. What I've seen in terms of beef, you know, it's anywhere between 13 to 40% generally in terms of that gross carbon footprint can be mitigated by soil carbon sequestration. That's one point. I think as well, we need to be mindful there is an optimal level of sequestration as well. And, you know, some farms might have not too much soil carbon at the moment, so the scope for improvement there is significant, but you do get to an optimal level. And beyond that, you know, it starts to become negative in terms of soil carbon and the quality of the soil. So that's, again, something to be mindful of. Definitely avenues that can be explored in terms of that. And I think it's something over the course of PRISM that we will be looking at further.
Thank you.
If I can add to that, actually, because that's just popped something into my brain which we haven't talked about yet, it is that unfortunately, for many of you on the call who are engaged, who are actively doing things to be better and better every day, potentially you have less of an avenue to improve than the people who are doing a really rubbish job, because you're already doing so well. So bearing in mind, when you get the reports through, and I might say, oh, you might want to look at this, which will make a 2% difference to your carbon footprint, that's because you're already doing so well that I can't look at your figures and go, oh yeah, you're doing a rubbish job. You can change all these 50 things because it's obviously really appalling, you know. So often when you look at the reports, you may go, well, that's a 1% difference, that's a 2% difference, that isn't going to change it much, but that's because you're doing so well as it is. So it's all about those incremental gains after a certain point, because honestly, the biggest changes we can see are taking someone who's doing a really appalling job now and just making them half as good, for example. But the better you are, the more difficult it is in some ways to keep on making those gains.
Yeah.
And if I could just add to that as well, Jude, in terms of those incremental improvements, and we see it elsewhere, all of those small improvements taken together over time do make a significant difference. It's the philosophy of Team Sky in terms of cycling, and it's certainly something I think that could be proven here too as well. Those marginal changes taken together can put your farm in a very different place after a period of time. And that's why I think it's particularly important to get started on that journey as soon as you can.
So what advice would you have, Mike, to others on the call which either haven't had they maybe have joined up but haven't had their assessment yet, or haven't joined up at all?
What advice shall I give them? If you've already done the assessment and you're waiting for the figures, wait for the figures. But if you haven't done the assessment, just get on. It is worth so much to you in terms of looking at your business, telling you what your business is doing. It's really important. And then being able to literally drill down into your business and decide where the problems may lie. Because as time goes on, the carbon footprint of your production system is going to be more and more important in terms of dealing with ABP or other outlets that you sell your produce to. It may be that it actually adds value to it at some point in the future. If you can prove, or if I can prove, that my beef has a lower footprint than X, Y, and Z, or the average, perhaps we can do a deal and I can offer you low carbon beef at a slightly, at a premium to help the rest of the supply chain deal with its carbon footprint. There's a comment before that 90% of the carbon footprint of the beef and lamb supply chain is from the farmers. So if we can reduce that figure, it's going to help everybody. And going forward, if we can then use that as a marketing tool with the consumer and say, look, and I'm not about using it one supermarket against the other. Our biggest danger isn't supermarkets, it's other proteins. So it's chicken in particular and pork. Chicken, which can have a horrendous carbon footprint, and pork's not all that good either. So if because we can sequester so much carbon, can get our carbon footprint down, and we can appeal to the consumers on that basis, we have an absolute ace in our hands that nobody else is going to be able to get near.
That's very well spoken, Mike. You're right on there. And the more people we can get involved and come forward with figures, that we can fight this false media program. There's so many false statements coming out there, and we need to get something in figures positive against it.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. I think we'll start some questions now, because I can see there's lots of questions come in the chat. So Megan's going to help us with the questions and ask those questions.
Well, yep, so we've had a couple of questions come in. Obviously, keep adding them if you think of anything, and we'll make sure we get round to them. So we've had a couple from Adrian. First, if I go to you, Jude, he's asked, would changing the 12-month rule make a significant change to the carbon footprint of beef?
Oh, that's a really good question. Can you come back to me on that? Because I'm going to think about it in the next couple of minutes, and I don't want to say something really stupid and then in 20 minutes time go, oh no, I'm talking complete rubbish. In theory, yes. But let me think about that for a couple of minutes and come back to me if that's all right. I'll wave my hands about if there's not a pause to tell you that I've got an answer. But yeah, I'm going to think on that one, because that's a really good question, and that's not one I've heard before, which is actually really unusual.
Well done, Adrian.
Always like it when you can catch someone out.
I'll have a go at that.
So I've just got sort of a bit of a question for myself, for Michael. In terms of, obviously we've discussed carbon and sequestration, and how would you see the importance of insetting carbon versus offsetting?
Yes, I think it's a very important area to focus on. And, we've seen a lot of talk around carbon markets generally, and, we hear the term being used around that, the Wild West. And I think there's a number of reasons for that in terms of how the regulation, the verification around that is set up. And I think from a farm business point of view as well, whilst there might be a temptation around carbon markets, I think it's crucial to remember your core business activity, be it in terms of beef or sheep production in this case, and a future scenario where competing in terms of environmental footprint will become more important. I think it is very important to ensure that that's reserved as much as possible in terms of either improving the carbon footprint of your business or looking at the carbon footprint along the supply chain to help, UK beef PLC, if I can use that term overall. So I think proceed with caution in terms of carbon markets, and I think prioritize around the core of your own business, considering the future, where things are moving to in terms of emissions and where the targets are in particular for 2050.
And while we're with you, Michael, Mike's just asked if we can clarify the definitions of insetting versus offsetting, please.
So as I would understand it in terms of insetting, it's very much focusing on with regards to the carbon sequestration mitigation that might take place on your farm, that is inset against particularly in terms of your supply chain, as I would see it. So with regards to supplying down into the processor level, whereas offsetting is very much focused on if you wanted to reduce your carbon footprint or sell carbon credits to someone that's involved in another supply chain altogether. It could be a big multinational business involved in the logistics sector, for example. They are keen to buy carbon credits elsewhere to offset their emissions that they would have within their own individual operations. So they will look at carbon credits that might be linked to instance for planting trees over a period of time, and then can claim that is offsetting against the fuel utilisation within their business operations, for instance.
Megan, shall I just answer the one about the one farmer's asked that we desperately need to discuss the figures with other farmers. We will be holding, so at the end of April, we've got our first discussion group at Bromstead Farm, and then we are just in the process of arranging one in the southwest for the following week, beginning of May. Discussion groups. There was supposed to be one a few months ago, but we just need to get more farmers assessed to be able to get those groups together. And so we will be holding more of those discussion groups around the country. And for those that are further afield and can't travel to those, we'll do smaller meetings like this with only sort of 10 people on, so that we can have that discussion for those that don't want to travel too far to those meetings.
Yeah, because it was me that put the question on. We've had all our reports. I've read them all. But they're very much black and white. They've taken figures and they've come out with a number and it says, yes, you're average, yes, you're below average, yes, you're above average. But there's no, I'm obviously not as detailed as Cosby and Mike are yet, that I don't understand how you've come to those figures. So I've got all the data that I prepared and discussed with the assessor. And then all of a sudden I've got these reports. For example, it says that my bedding costs are very high. I personally don't understand how my bedding costs are high. We're an entirely 50-50 mixed arable and beef farm. So we produce all our own straw that comes directly onto our own holding. There is no cost involved. So how can my bedding costs be high?
Michael, I guess it's best if we can, because you can have a feedback meeting directly with Anderson's as well. So I'm guessing, have you had one of those?
No.
Okay.
And I've got Jude's report as well.
Okay, if I could just respond on that. Yes, in terms of the feedback session, definitely speak with your assessor. That is something, half an hour session or longer than that if needs be, to go through your report. With regards to the bedding cost point specifically, I know, because there is a view out there, you might think nominally use your own bedding. That is no cost associated with that. I suppose from an economic point of view, we look at what we call the opportunity cost. You could have either used that bedding on your own farm, or you could have sold it elsewhere, and there would be an imputed cost in there most likely, and that would be compared against the industry average as recorded on the agricultural budgeting and costing book. And I think that's where possibly that cost difference is coming into place.
So have I shot myself in the foot by giving him the figure that I used to sell my excess straw? Do you see what I mean? Is it a circular argument?
I think I wouldn't say you've necessarily shot yourself in the foot on that side of things. Because I know for some of the farms have been done, I can't comment individually and won't comment individually, in detail on a specific situation. There are also budget cost figures out there. The latest edition of the Agricultural Budgeting and Costings book, updated every 6 months. There would be average figures taken from that as well to give an indication of an imputed figure for that homegrown element.
Thank you. So I think, Jude, you had a response to the first question. If we just hop back to that one for now.
Yep, I have an answer. And the reason that I delayed was that I went, yes, oh, but no, but what if, and what if, and what if? And I was trying to think about all of the moving parts. The simple answer is yes to taking away the 12-month rule. So we could call beef slaughtered at, say, 10 or 11 months beef would bring down the carbon footprint in theory. The theory being that therefore we would sell beef at 10 or 11 months rather than 12. And I certainly know of one farmer, although I don't know their name, and off the top of my head, I can't even remember what region they're from, but I know I've looked at some results recently that said this farmer would finish them at less than 12 months if they could, but they're curtailed by the 12-month rule. So it would certainly allow some people to do this, which would overall bring the carbon footprint down, everything else being equal. And I say that because, of course, you could be a person could be finishing beef at 11 months, but, and this is an example I've made up out of my head, but doing so on a massively high soya diet, for example. So in theory, 12-month beef should be really efficient, should have a low carbon footprint. Again, everything else being equal. So in theory, it should bring down the total carbon footprint. But that's lots of caveats and lots of everything else being equal. As a side note, I keep hearing this issue, and I know the National Beef Association have been talking about this as well, because it is a real concern for an awful lot of farmers. But yeah, it should bring it down. Now, the only thing that I would say is there would be some trade-off, of course, with veal carbon footprint, and we're not dealing with the veal carbon footprint on this call, but we're still going to have the same number of cattle in the UK. We've just been changing the date at which they finish. So there'd be some kind of trade-off and balance with veal as well. But yeah, everything else being equal, cutting 12-month rule should allow people who can to finish intensively finish cattle earlier, so should bring the carbon footprint down to some degree.
Great, thank you. If we just hop to Mike now, we've got a question for you from Mark regarding how you feel your footprint will compare with dairy beef, obviously as a suckler herd.
Yeah, hi Mark, and nice to hear from you. Our carbon figures are very low. We grow a lot of red clover, have a lot of clover in the swards. We have very fast growing animals. So my carbon footprint is very low. Yes, I can do better than dairy fed beef because two main reasons: sequestration. Majority of dairy bred beef doesn't go outside. It's in feedlots all the time, so it's got a higher carbon footprint. More diesel, more electric, all maybe bought in feeds. So that's one side of it. And as you know, I've discussed at length over a few beers at various times. Growth rate is king in terms of profitability. So fast growing cattle that finish as quickly as possible, which I think is where Adrian's question is coming from. Adrian's sort of really talking about getting a 400 kilo carcass, which is the maximum sort of size ABP will take at the moment, at less than 12 months, which has got to be more efficient. So I can compete and do a better job in terms of carbon than the dairy bred beef industry, unless they're going to change their habits and their plans or how they do their calculations to make it more appealing.
Great, thank you, Mike. And we've got another question from Adrian. Jude and Michael, I'll put this to both of you regarding, is it possible to reach carbon neutral on livestock farms and create a profit as well?
I think, Jude, I can share my thoughts initially around that. I think, you know, in terms of where farming is at the moment, you know, it's well documented, the issues around that in terms of profitability. I think it's important to take a step-by-step approach towards some of this, and particularly on that journey towards getting to net zero. I think there are, you know, to get to net zero, there are going to need to be some advances that will be made over the coming decade. We hear about talking about, you know, bolus type treatments for methane and the like that will be needed. And I think you're going to need a number of those steps in order to get to that net zero position. In the here and now where we're at, I think, you know, that sweet spot in the Venn diagram, focusing on what can make you more productive and reduce emissions is an important first step. Recognizing, though, fully that there will be other steps that will be needed over that time. And I think science can help on that journey as well. So I do think if we take that long-term view, I think it will be possible. It will be a challenge, though, as well. I'm not shying away from that. But I do think it is possible over the longer term, particularly if we do start to consider in an era as well where we've the full you know, costs and benefits of beef farming from a carbon sequestration point of view as well. And I think, you know, the scope for environmental performance being an aspect of quality, I think it's something, you know, from a consumer market point of view, we shouldn't, you know, we should consider it at least as well. So I think it is possible, but a challenge.
Just to add to that, I agree. I think we need to chase profit and chase net zero at the same time. I think we could all land ourselves in big trouble as a beef industry if we forego either, because obviously we have some huge challenges and an awful lot of people jumping down our necks about carbon. But, you know, ultimately, if we don't make a profit at some point, we're not going to have a business in a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both. I think, as Michael says, the chances of everybody doing it tomorrow or next week are really, really, really small. But who knows what's going to happen in 10, 15, 20 years. And I think we have to be open to change and open to looking at best management and open to talking with other farmers about, I tried this, I changed this, what do you think about this grass, what do you think about this breed, you know, and having those conversations. Because honestly, me and Michael can talk at you for hours and say, oh, you should do this, you should do this. The most fruitful conversations that I've seen have been Farmer X talking to Farmer Y saying, oh, what did you think of that? Well, I try this. Oh, didn't think of that. Maybe I'll try that. So we've got to be open to having these conversations and thinking outside the box a little bit as well. Whether every single individual beef farm, for example, can be net zero, honestly, I'm not sure that everyone will ever be. As an industry, perhaps potentially we can be, but I don't think honestly we're going to get to a point where every farm is in every situation in every day, not least because we're entirely dependent on the weather and none of us know what's going to happen with that tomorrow, next week, next year, for example. So in contrast to a table maker or a hotel, for example, you know, we have the weather to deal with and we have animals to deal with, and those are the two most variable things almost on the planet. So I'd like to think we can be. I would never like to say by whichever year we're going to do it, because yeah, I think that's anybody's guess.
Thank you,
Mike,
Jude.
did you want to come in?
Yeah, if I can just add to that. The government's announcement last week regarding the SFI puts quite a lot of money into growing legumes. And legumes, I think, are one of the ways that we can massively reduce our carbon footprint. So I think we can reduce our carbon footprint and remain profitable at the same time. The two are linked anyway. Efficiency and carbon go hand in hand, but the SFI is going to give us a huge help in terms of how we could potentially change our farming systems away from where we are now and get very close to that carbon zero. It is achievable. We know that.
Kitty, can I put on a question here? We're all talking about our own agriculture industry. comparison to other industries, are we the worst in the world? We seem to be.
If I take that one for a second, no, we're certainly not, although it does depend which metric we're talking about. And of course, tonight we're primarily talking about carbon, but I think at this point I do need to underline that it's not just carbon, it's biodiversity, it's soil quality, it's water quality, it's pollution, you know, it's on and on and on and on before you even look at the economic bits and the social bits. And to point out as well, and I'm sure Katie would echo this, that we're not just going to be looking at carbon, we're going to look at, for example, biodiversity going forward. So we're certainly not the worst in the world with regards to carbon. If we look at it on a global basis, the world average for carbon, which is entirely meaningless because there is no average beef system across the world, but the world average for carbon, according to the FAO, would be about 47 kilos of beef per kilo of dead weight. In the UK, we're about 50 to 60% lower than that. The figures vary depending at what data you're looking at, but sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia would all be way worse than us on a carbon emissions per kilo of dead weight basis. But again, those are very sort of black and white numbers that don't take into account a lot of considerations. And obviously we're very UK based at the moment, but of course the value of a cow in Kenya, for example, to a smallholder farmer is, I would sort of say, far bigger than the value of a single cow to any of us in terms of cultural status, income, health, etc., etc. So we are certainly not the worst. We are one of the best in carbon, animal welfare, traceability, all sorts of things else. But we've got to bear in mind that there's also not always just carbon that we need to think about when it comes to sustainability.
That's good to hear.
I'll just pick up there from what Jude had said, sorry, Megan, about, so we will be taking about 50 farmers on a step further. So those that are keen or enthusiastic, do make yourselves known to the assessors or directly to us that you are keen on either looking at soil health, biodiversity, water usage, those sorts of things. So we will be looking through Global Farm Metrics to do some further studies on certain farms.
Great, thank you for that, Katie. So we've just had another really good question come in, which I'd like to pass to Mike and Crosby. In terms of if you're a farmer just starting out thinking about carbon and what to do, where would you suggest to start in terms of sort of measuring your footprint, what to look at on your farm?
Ooh. I'll let Mike start that one.
Yeah, cheers, Crosby. It depends. That's a good question.
Yes.
The first thing I would say to Johnson will be do this carbon audit. Just do the carbon audit. Doesn't matter how good or bad your figures are. Just do it to start with, and then all the support will come flooding in behind that. So don't be scared of it. Don't be scared of what figures there are or what figures they come back with. Just do it. Okay? Then it'll open your mind to what's out there. I'm not sure what websites or publications are available. Back in the day, the Better Returns program from Beef and Lamb was a really good place to start. There's sort of 5 or 6 main principles there to look at. If you can get on control and get on top of those, that'll certainly help your carbon footprint massively. There is a huge amount of information out there about carbon footprints and how they're calculated, but I wouldn't worry about that to start with. Just do the audit, and then it'll start just to sort of come to you.
I just simply add, don't go in blind. Look for support. Look for a lot of advice around you. If you can find people that tell you things not to do, are the most important ones, because that's the one thing I would have learned in life. That I think I've learned more about farming by making too many mistakes, and I won't do it again. But certainly get good advice around you.
If I could
Thank you,
just add to that as well, you know, in terms of the tool that we're using, and we've done quite a bit of analysis on it at Anderson's and various guises over the years, you know, in terms of all the carbon footprinting tools that are out there, and AgriCalc does come out, you know, consistently in the top 3, and it has got a strong cohort of farms to which you can measure yourself against as well. And I do think that's very important. And I think in terms of the PRISM assessments and how we seek to approach it, you know, we're keen on identifying some of those quick wins that the farms can begin to take quickly to start to move the dial in terms of their carbon footprint. So if you're one of the best performers, if you're one who might be a bit behind the average, I still think there's scope for improvement. And I echo Mike's sentiments, you know, it is a very good place to start. And from there, you can start to improve.
Michael, you said one of the most important things there. You will be good in some of them, but you'll not be good in all of them. You know, there's tops and bottoms and everything. And once you find out what they are, that lets you progress further from that.
Great, thank you. One thing I just wanted to ask you about, Katie, is in terms of the grant that will become available, sort of when it will open, how it works, what you can claim for on it.
Yep. So we have a grant of a pot of 250,000 that will become available once we get everybody signed up, so that it's fair for everyone to apply for. We will release that, and it will probably be released in a couple of waves. But the first wave, I'm hoping we can open that up in about May time. Once we've got everyone signed up. If we get everyone signed up, if we have a sudden flush of everybody, but we want everybody through the first assessment, because then once they're through the first assessment, they'll be eligible then to apply for the grant. It should be fairly simple to apply. We are asking people to obviously say what they're wanting to apply for. There will be a list of things, but what people want to apply for will be different. What will help one farm improve their carbon footprint might be different to another farm, etc. So the list isn't, you know, it hasn't got everything on, and you can apply for something that isn't on the list. And all you've got to do is in the box, obviously say what you want to apply for, how much will that cost, and why are you applying for that, and how is that going to reduce your carbon footprint. And we'll obviously go through that, assess it, decide whether it's acceptable or not, and then reply back to you within a couple of weeks. And then obviously you can go ahead and buy whatever it is to hopefully help reduce your carbon footprint, which then in 2 years' time, when we redo the assessments, with a bit of luck, your carbon footprint will have gone in the right direction. From these small incremental changes that you've hopefully made over the couple of years. Anyway, we want to make it fair for everyone, that once we get everybody signed up and pass that first assessment, we'll then be able to release the grant.
Great, thank you for going over that, Katie. So we've had another question off Adrian in the chat. If Jude, I could direct this towards you, in terms of, do we need to be careful that we don't chase numbers in order to reduce our footprint, because there's no metric on a carbon audit for efficiency?
That's a really good question. Really, really good question. And of course, if we're doing a carbon footprint, it's always going to be about numbers. So it's going to be, you know, 41, 53, this is high, this is lower, this is below average, this is above average. One of the things, so at the moment, when we give you your numbers compared to the average, for example, that is the AgriCalc average. So it includes the good, the bad and the ugly. As time goes on, and we get more farmers in the ABP data set, we can be more selective. So we can say, compared to farms as similar to yours as they can be, bearing in mind that no farm is ever the same as any other farm. So we should be able to say, compared to, let's say, you know, lowland spring calving suckler in the southwest with, you know, between 100 and 300 cows, your footprint is higher or lower than the average. So at the moment, your higher and lower are in the middle of a big pool that includes everybody. As we get further on, we can be more specific. So I would be loath to say, compared to the average of, I can't remember how many farmers are in AgriCalc, but it's thousands and thousands, you know, compared to, let's say, 8,000 farms, my farm is entirely average. You know, what we actually want to look at further on is, how do I compare to farms like mine? And that'll be more meaningful. But I agree, like, someone's got to put some boundaries somewhere. you know, at some point, I imagine there'll be something from somewhere going, this is a good carbon footprint, this is a bad carbon footprint. But at the end of the day, what I would like to see personally on every single farm is every farm improves compared to last year, or compared to 2 years ago, compared to 5 years ago. Now, bearing in mind with carbon footprinting, as I said earlier, often we can't control the animals, and we certainly can't control the weather. So your carbon footprint next year might go up compared to this year because of drought, because of flooding, because of cold weather, because of a health issue that you weren't expecting, you know, whatever it might be. But overall, over, let's say, 5 years, I would hope to see that people are improving, people are doing things better, people are looking at that data so they get better, which doesn't mean everyone has to be under some magic number of, you know, 16 kilos of carbon per kilo of dead weight for beef or whatever it might be. It just means getting better and better and better and better. And again, I come back to, at the moment, we're all looking at carbon. That doesn't mean that in 5 or 10 years' time, we won't have equal emphasis on biodiversity or on soil quality or on water quality. So yes, we shouldn't all be chasing to get down to, you know, 18 kilos of carbon per kilo of dead weight. But to some degree, we do need to look at the numbers, because otherwise we don't know how much we've improved. And if we can't benchmark it, then we can't measure it and we can't improve. So we need to rely on the numbers to some degree, I'm afraid.
That's great, thank you. I'm just aware of time and obviously not wanting to eat into everybody's evenings anymore. So if I just hand back over to Katie to wrap up, and thank you all very much for coming.
Thanks, Meg. Thank you very much. And I think everyone's realised that wherever you are on your sustainability journey, there's always room for improvement. Can I just do one last quick poll? So those that aren't already involved in PRISM, would you like to join now? Now you've heard from our experts and Crosby and Mike this evening.
Oh, not that bit more thought, no.
And if you, hopefully you've got the email address anyway, but if you are interested in joining and you want to sign up, if you send an email to info@prism2030.com, that's info@prism2030.com. Hopefully you've got that. It probably would have been on the email with the newsletters that have come out, or linked to this that's come out, or just pop your name in the chat and I can pick it up from there and contact you about it. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining in this evening. That's brilliant that we've got, so everybody, that there's 16 responses and 81% want to join up. So that's great results there. And thank you very much for all your time. Obviously, I know your time's precious and I know you're all really busy. So thank you very much for joining in this evening and taking the time out of your evening. Those that haven't had your assessment booked in with your assessor, please get into, hopefully they've sent you an initial email, get in touch with your assessor and try and get that booked in. If you contact them, it makes their life probably a lot easier to get you fixed in the diary. And those that haven't got the dates in yet or signed up, we'll get that sorted out for you if you get in touch with us. So thank you very much, everybody, and hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. And you're not too, I'm not sure how much snow there is when I walk out the door. There was an inch when I walked in, so I'm hoping it's not too snowy now. But have a nice rest of your evening. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.